on the main. And then we also have an off-campus site, which is where our interactive discussion-based multi-generational service takes place. So all of these pictures are through that context. So first, why did we choose the path of intergenerational worship? And this, when we're using those words, we're talking about all ages participating together in all aspects of faith community. So this is not the same as like some churches provide worship bags within the pew, like busy bags. This is a little bit more than that. This is involving kids and teens and adults in all aspects of faith community. So some of the decision making, some of the questioning and figuring out where we go next, what do we do differently. Some of the actual lesson and activity planning comes through the kids and the teens and the adults working together. We're serving together, we're worshiping together. So all those things that make up a faith community, we're all participating together. And that's really important because that's where I feel like it's easy sometimes for a traditional model of a church to leave children and teens out of that process. And we're really empowering them because the church is going to be in their hands very soon. And so these are some quotes for how we got to intergenerational worship or how it's going since we started. We've been doing this model of this service for a little over a year and a half now. And it started as an experiment. We all on our visioning team thought, well, this is wild and crazy, but we're going to give it a try. We'll reassess shortly after we begin to see if we continue doing it or not. Because when you bring everywhere from a newborn in the room all the way up to, somebody in their 70s and 80s, and you really are trying to create a place of worship and discipleship, it can be a little chaotic. And if you're not careful and intentional, it can be easy to water things down or not meet people where they're at. So it takes a lot of planning and a lot of intentionality. So it was kind of the great worship experiment of 20, I guess we started doing this back in 2020 when we really started planning it. But it has gone wildly above what we would have dreamed or imagined. So here's some of these quotes from a few people that participate in our community. This one's from Kate, who's a mom of 3. She has 3 kids that attend the service. My husband and I were looking for ways to connect our kids more with the church. If they feel like it's an important part of their lives, it will be, even as they get older. And we hear that a lot with kids or teens who don't feel like they were really a part of their church. They don't have as much reason to stick around once they get to 20s, 30s, because they were never really empowered or engaged to be a part of that body of Christ. We had this actually heard a lot, not just from one children's ministry volunteer, but people who often volunteer for children's ministry feel like they get stuck. And this person voiced what I've heard a lot. I felt like I kept having to choose between being involved in children's ministry or participating in worship or Bible studies for myself. So feeling that pool of our volunteers of, I did want to participate in some children's ministry, but not all of it all the time. And that can be hard for especially churches with a small context or a rural context. We have this one by a guy, Jenkins, who I just think he has thrived in this community. He said, as a 30-year-old male without my own kids, I was a little skeptical of how this would work, but I'm actually really digging it. And he is totally into it. He is committed on all levels. So I think that's awesome to hear from somebody that he said, normally I might be annoyed by all the kids in the room, but he's not. And then our pastor, who also happens to be my husband. So I'm in this on multiple levels as a pastor's wife and as a mom and as a leader in our church. He said, we didn't just want another discipleship program or model. We wanted authentic community engaged in and participating in life as the body of Christ in the ways that felt most natural to our everyday lives. And then there's one on the bottom that I can't see, but I hope you can. It says, there's an older woman in our church, and I've heard this from a lot of older people as well. I just miss hearing the kids in the pews. There's a lot of people that maybe churches don't have a thriving children's program and they miss hearing that sound of little voices and scuffles in the pews. So those were some of the people that contributed to this conversation of creating a worship space where we could all worship and engage in faith community together. Again, the context is going to look really different. We based it on prayer and on relationships that we had already formed with a lot of people from different generations. What are kids looking for in worship? What are teens looking for in worship? What do young adults need? And what do older adults need? So this was a lot. It was a slow process. This was not a rushed thing, really gathering all those voices and as many people to the table as we could and being very intentional about what our worship service would look like. I'm going to pause for a second just to look at the chat here. Is there anything? Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure. So we meet for this intergenerational worship service at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and it is off campus. And one of the things that we heard over and over again from especially young families was they needed a lot of low barrier to entry worship opportunities. So for them, it was challenging if it was too early. It was also challenging if it was too late in the day, because we also considered doing like a Sunday night. And they said that would be really challenging in thinking about getting ready for the week. So timing is important to consider. A lot of people preferred, and this was from all generations, having food there so they didn't have to worry about getting up early. They wanted to be able to still sleep in on a Sunday morning and just eat breakfast when they got there. And we all know that if you are doing any kind of ministry, it's important that you have some food there. And they really wanted to feel like a comfortable, casual space where nobody needed to worry about showing up dressed up. You could just come whatever way was comfortable for you. And that was especially true of a lot of parents with young kids. We don't want to have to fight with kids to get dressed up on a Sunday morning. So those were some of the things that we considered in coming up with our time and our context. We also wanted to keep it short, knowing that when you do have all of those squiggly bodies in one room, everybody's attention span is going to be a little bit limited. And we found that to be true even with adults. As we started doing this model, adults really appreciated having a shorter time frame that was a little bit more intentional and broken up in different chunks that we'll talk about, because all of us have limited attention span. We also want it to be very interactive, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. So first thing with intergenerational worship is establishing these connections. And I love this quote. Nicole, since I see your face, would you mind reading this quote for us and it's not just me talking the whole time?
Sure. We are communal creatures who have spent almost our entire history living in multi-generational groups. We thrive in this environment as we hear stories of where we've come from and who we are. When intergenerational ministry is done with intention, people from different generations make connections that would likely never occur outside the church. Alyssa Ellett, Illustrated Church.
Thank you. And that's a great website. If you want to go on to Illustrated Church, Illustrated Ministry, it's a great website to get some more resource and information from. So I chose this picture to go along with this because this is a group that you would not see outside of this context interacting together. We've got a gentleman in the front who is in his 70s, and then we've got our friend Jenkins, who I quoted earlier, who's 30, and then a teenager and a younger girl sitting side by side, and they're all sitting together at this table in the context of a worship service. And I wish you could have heard the conversation going around this table as we dove into worship together. They did a lot of discussion questions together, which was fantastic. And I just think it's so cool. In what other environment might you see that group really, truly connecting with one another? And that girl wearing the beanie happens to be my daughter. And I just think it's so cool that she has people in her life, and I'm speaking just purely as a parent here, that she has people in her life who are older, that are interesting and cool and have cool stories to share with her, that are building into her life that she might not have if she was just in the context of a traditional church service where she wasn't interacting as much. And then part of our church that we're very intentional about is, are we actually learning and growing together? And this is you're gonna have to pay attention to what makes the most sense in your context. So for us, we do a lot of broken up, I say activity, but it's not just busy activity. It's very intentional. We have our service split up into almost like a schedule, but it changes, depending on what we have going on, where we'll have a centering time that might be focused on engaging one or more of our senses in worship, listening, touching, feeling, seeing, smelling. We're very into five senses worship. We do a lot of prayer stations where people can get up and move around. And so I showed a picture of that one there where a group had gone to this prayer station. It was focused on how we're better together in the context of faith community. And they built themselves as this building off of each other, conjoining together. And then the prayer was that we would be this supportive community for one another, and that we would be a supportive light in the body of Christ as we go out into our community during the week. We also involve kids. You can see that picture there, reading scripture, telling the story, acting out stories. Sometimes they make something and present it. They'll work on it while we're doing a teaching time or a discussion. We also try to include a lot of adults, because we learned that adults really like to do things that are hands-on and creative. And so we'll always have a table of things that are available for those who want to do something hands-on that goes along with worship. They like to get up, they like to participate. So we have a lot of different generations participating all throughout the service. So it's not just one person or a couple of people leading it. We do have a group that meets called Creative Partners that anybody can be a part of, and they are the ones that do a lot of the worship planning together. And we have several generations as a part of that Creative Partners group, and that switches up throughout the year depending on people's schedules. A big thing with all children's ministry, and especially this, don't be afraid to take some risks, try new things. Not everything that you do is going to work 100% of the time. Be prepared to grow a thick skin and be okay with things just totally flopping. Sometimes we'll be in the middle of something and say, this isn't working. We're just going to stop here and we're going to go a different direction. And that is okay. In fact, it kind of lightens the context a little bit, because then it lowers the pressure. Not everything has to be polished and pristine. It's real, it's authentic, it's organic. Again, I've talked about involving multiple generations in all aspects, in the planning, the decision-making. When it comes to actual worshiping together, let them be a part of the process. Let them feel like it is their church and they get to be a part of it. And then celebrate often what God is doing. We celebrate a lot as a church, and a lot of times it'll just be a little thing like a prayer station where we can just put all our praises and celebrations out there, look at what God is doing. We have an interactive service that is split up into a teaching time and then discussion questions. And if we need to, if things are going to go a little bit deeper, we might do first one Sunday a kids discussion group and an adult discussion group, and then other times we'll mix them all together. And I just love hearing all of the insight and wisdom that comes out from people sharing their experiences, their stories, their dreams, their fears, and the ways that God is working in their life. So we celebrate big what God is doing. We also have a lot of opportunities to serve together. So one of the things I talked about was creating low barrier opportunities for people to come in and engage with the church. And that can happen on a Sunday morning. Like I said, we provide food. You don't have to dress up. It's 10 o'clock, so you can still sleep in a little bit. But it can also be throughout the week. So the bottom two pictures that you're seeing there, we serve a community meal on Wednesday nights that anybody can come to. We cook it up, we serve it, and everybody just gathers to eat. And we have about 90 to 100 people that participate pretty regularly in that, all generations. And we've been able to incorporate a lot of those people serving in the kitchen. So just because they come to the meal, they often want to get involved. And how can I help? How can I be a part of this? Anywhere from little 4 and 5-year-olds gathering up the salt and pepper shakers at the end of it, or wiping tables, or chasing each other with brooms. So that's one of the ways that people can come in. There's really no stipulations, no strings attached for them just being able to come in and have a meal. They don't also have to agree to come to a service. They don't have to participate in a Bible study. They're just showing up and seeing, what is this church about? And kind of putting their feelers out there. And this has been an awesome way for people to say, I've heard a lot about what's going on. I just wanted to come check it out myself without feeling the pressure to have to come on a Sunday morning. But we also, as a church, look for a lot of opportunities to go out. I hear often, and I've felt this way before, how do we get kids into our church? How do we get more teens into our church? Well, sometimes you have to go to where they are first and build those relationships. It's a slow process. So these other 2 pictures over here are from an event we've participated in the last 4 years as a church. It's our back to school community safety day. And we distribute school supplies there. And we also talk about health and mental health, how to get support when you need it, how to identify when you need help, and then provide some resources there for what's available in the community and through the church for when you need a little bit of extra help. So that's always really, really a big deal. We have a whole line of people that come to the church's station. It's like the biggest station there. And they really do just view us as being a good neighbor to the community. So that's a great way for the church to get involved and to be viewed as a friend to our teens and our kids. Like Nicole's quote that she started with, this is where the pulse is of where our hearts are. If we are not taking care of the kids and the teens in our community, why would they come into our church? If we're not already showing them that we love them and care about them, they're not really going to feel a reason to come in and see what we're about. So sometimes in order to get that relationship established, you got to go to where the kids and teens are, and it does take time. And I know Nicole's going to be sharing some more about what that can look like in a school environment as well, partnering with schools. And then our big goal was, we want this community of faith to go far beyond just Sunday morning worship. We want this to be the real deal, engaged in each other's lives. And so as a church, we plan, and it's not just on the pastoral staff or the leadership team. We have people all throughout the church that have ideas. Hey, can I lead a hiking trip in September? I want to host a bonfire at my house. I want to get a picnic going on. I want to share my art talent and lead a group of people through an art project. So all of these things are ways to plug people in. And if they have an idea, we say, go for it. You take the lead and we'll support you however we can. Just providing these opportunities for people to be together and strengthen those bonds outside of the church walls. So I love this quote. This is from that same website we looked at earlier, or we talked about earlier. The young and old learn from and care for each other. They challenge one another to release their assumptions, think differently, and to practice compassion. And this is where it's really lived out in the nitty-gritty. And I can't emphasize enough how much we have seen, even just in a year and a half, these bonds of friendship form across families, across generations. They really are learning what it looks like to care for each other, to listen well, and to offer compassion and learn and grow together. So I know that was kind of long. I went probably far over my time, but I just wanted to share what it looks like in our context to celebrate what God is doing, and then to open it up if there are any questions or comments about what we're doing through intergenerational worship.
Thank you, Kyla. I think what we'll do is, if people have questions, if you could throw those in the chat for us. I know that Reverend Tuttle has got some other things that are happening this afternoon, so I want to make sure she has time to share as well. I'll go ahead and give her introduction, and then Lee, do you want me to operate your slides, or do you want us to just let you share your screen?
If you operate my slides, that would be great.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so next we have Reverend Lee Tuttle. She has been an ordained deacon in the Western North Carolina Conference since 2014. She's worked at Shady Grove United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem for 23 years. Lee is the minister of preteens and children. She leads confirmation and middle school ministry as well. Lee actively engages the congregation in service through service teams, adult mission trips, and small group Bible studies. Lee and Brian Tuttle have 6 children together, ranging from 24 to 9 years old. Eli is the only one left in the nest at home. They enjoy their grandbaby Mia and have another grandbaby on the way in May. Lee has an estimated 50,000 hours of service in the local church. That's a few. So thank you, Reverend Tuttle, for joining us today.
Good morning. It is so good to be here with you. And as you heard Nicole say, I do have lots of hours in the local church. I remember when I first started serving in the local church, it was much like my first ski experience. I went and got for the first day I skied, I got a lesson, which was just shortly a few weeks back, the first time I skied. I was in a group lesson with 8 and 9-year-olds, if you can imagine. And we got the basics of how to ski, of how to snowplow, how to try and turn. And then they turned us loose on the slopes. And I remember trying to go down that first big hill for the first time and getting out of control and thinking, oh my goodness, this is going too fast. This is just I don't have the skills that I need to be able to handle this right now. And so I quickly, plopped down and sat down and to realize that I did not have what I needed at that time. So today I hope to empower you as well to have the skills for when things start to snowball in your ministries and God begins to do a good work, that you would be able to use some of the skills given to you today to be able to put into action to empower the other leaders around you. I serve a preschool ministry here that is on Sunday afternoons. I serve an elementary ministry we call Clubhouse. I serve a preteen ministry, which we call Club 56. I'm involved in confirmation and the middle school ministry. I'm also involved in serve teams, which have our community serving in different areas in the community. I'm involved in adult Bible studies by leading those and equipping others to lead. And when you hear of all the things that I have going on, you're like, how in the world could you possibly do that? And I possibly can't do it all. I realized I did not have the skills to do it all, that I couldn't control it all myself, and that I needed a simple process to begin. So today I hope to help you to think about creating a culture for empowering leaders. Now, if you think about what is it that stopped you from your leaders being in action? I'm going to show you some obstacles that are on the screen here. These come from a workshop that we received as a church from the intentional impact.com with Brian Zare, and he presents some ways that we get in the way of empowering others by having things that are too complex for people to get on, to figure out, whether it be website, whether it be ways to get engaged, they're just hard to get engaged, taking too much control or on your own, being complacent or not knowing what to do in it, and having an attitude of complacency, or having more concerns than having a step of faith. And so the solutions here are to have a simple process, to give ownership or release those to go out and to serve, to generate that passion in your ministries and take a step out into faith. When you do this, you'll create a culture in your environment, which is a DNA in your church. Your leaders will begin to model the faith that you want them to do, and you begin to build relationships. Building relationships is key. It is into everything you do. Some of my favorite times of ministry are my favorite stories is when I have empowered my leaders or my students to take ownership and to lead on their own. So I want to show you how you can maybe take a step to do that with the I see in you. But first of all, let me go to the next slide. Our church exists to love God, to make disciples, and to love everyone. But often we get consumed with our programs, our facilities, our staff, and the structure that kind of get in the way. Instead, I want you to think about building relationships and involving people into discipleship. And the way you can do that is to go to a I see in you structure when you are looking at their gifts and their talents. And it kind of looks like this. Nicole, could you go to the next slide? There. When you are involving leaders to empower others, the first thing you want to do is to model for them teaching, model for them leading, so they naturally watch everything you do. The first thing is you do it, they watch, and we talk about it. The second step would be we do it, the person, whether it be the student or the adult, help you, and then you talk about it. The third step would be that they do it, that they would actually do it. You help them, and then you continue to talk about it. The next step would be that they do it again, and you watch them as you empower them to do it, and then more brief discussion. And then the fifth step is they do it while they're empowering somebody else to take the lead in it. And so I see this in our small groups, where we come alongside and we're teaching our student leaders to become leaders. And what we have found is that rather than being a leader that is facilitating the whole time, we become coaches, where we are coaching our students and our adults, whatever age they are, to take ownership of the time there it is, in whatever leadership capacity we have. One way you can do that is by being a coach rather than a teacher, by giving up that control and then in helping them to basically clone what your vision is for your church. We want to create a culture of multiplying disciples. And we know that in this, we see that even Jesus taught us that to multiply, to be fruitful, to go out and to multiply. And it goes back to scripture about how we want to be a multiplier in every situation. And so in order to do that, you kind of have to create that culture to do that and involve your children, your youth, and your adults in the planning and the experiences of that. Nicole, can you go on to the next slide? In order to organize your biggest impact, we know that, Nicole, can you go on to the next slide?
I am technically inept, so
Okay.
I will work on it. You keep talking, and I'll see if I can figure out what I've done wrong.
Okay, that's fine. So what I have seen is that you want to create a sense of belonging and purpose in your groups over attraction and events. So developing relationships, prioritizing those relationships, caring about the people, building trust. Those are all crucial in your discipleship process. Over the attraction of whatever it is that you're trying to lure them in the door with, that they see the bigger instinct of it all. Helping parents get on board with that, with students, and teaching them the vision of what it is that you're doing. Here is other ways to empower in ministry, as Nicole has put up, to identify those leaders that you see have the gifts. Don't be timid about going to them and saying, I see in you, and tell them your gifts that you see in them, whether it be your adults who you need in leadership in the children's ministry and youth ministry, or in your areas you're serving, or whether it be your students. You go, I see these gifts in you. Have you considered using them in those ways? And then empower them to become involved in leadership, giving responsibility to them, relinquishing that control, as we said, giving clear expectations of what that it could look like, and supporting them with materials that would help them be successful, and sending them out, just like in Luke 10, where Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2 to heal and to cast out demons. You're sending teams out. You're sending youth out. You're sending groups out to serve, to feed, to nurture others. And so hopefully that I see in you approach would be one that is multiplied, where those student leaders are now identifying other student leaders that can take their responsibilities. And then same with the adults. It's creating a whole culture that would that would know that it is, they have permission to lead and to give ideas, and to inspire and to engage and to be enthusiastic about it. And it's a church wide it's a church-wide approach, not just what to do in the children's ministry or youth ministry that you would do oftentimes we get siloed into the children's ministry, the youth ministry, but this instead creates a climate for the way that we all want to see people engaging in ministry. We become the priesthood of all believers, creating ways for others to experience God together. And one of the ways that what I have seen work is, we've been involved in working in our local elementary school, where we have gotten to know people, invited them to the church. They have taken steps into the ministry, where that invitation becomes, let's experience God together. They come in to worship, and then now they're starting to take steps into small groups. And then I see those small, as they're in small groups, now they're taking steps into leadership. Those are some of my favorite stories, where I watch others shine and watch them grow and transform into a deeper commitment. Jake was one of our students, came back from camp. He was on fire for Christ, always reading his Bible. And he was then, I saw that in him and that spark in him, and I gave him permission to lead his group, as his adult leaders then helped mentor him and helped him lead the questions, help him answer the questions together with his group. And then that has created more and more excitement and passion, because our stories become stories that fuel the faith of others. So I know that was a lot of broad concepts in a short period of time, but I hope that to get you thinking about ways that you can engage your students and your adults in leadership.
Great. Thank you so much, Lee. So I know that's like a lot of content from Kyla and Lee, a lot of really good things. And if you're like me, you're already like thinking of the ways to connect that to your context, and you may have questions. So before we move to Matthew's presentation on community connections and collaboration, I'd like to take a few minutes now for any questions that you all might have for Kyla or for Pastor Lee, and have a brief amount of discussion so we can share some of the ideas or things that you're thinking about as they were sharing their presentations. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or if you want to raise a hand or throw something in the chat. We'll keep an eye on them. And we've got some coming through the chat right now. How do you work around school activities, and what do you mean by off campus?
Yeah, I can answer that. Off campus. One of the things that we wanted to do was create a space where people who don't feel comfortable coming into a church would feel free to gather. So we actually worked out a partnership with a local restaurant, where they have a music hall in the back that's a very cozy space, and they provide all the food and drinks for us and wait staff, so we don't have to worry about that, which is awesome. And they have all the sound equipment and soundboard and stuff for us to use there. So we have our main church, Sparta UMC, and then on Main Street is this local restaurant where that particular service meets on a Sunday morning.
And any thoughts about working around school activities?
I asked a question about the school activities because it's hard, if you will, to try to come up with a program where you can get the majority of the kids. I know you're not going to get 100% of the children and youth, but they're involved in so many different things. So how do you work around that? Is there a certain day of the week or a certain time of day that works best for you guys?
And Kyla, Lee, Matthew, feel free to jump in on any of these.
Yeah, we actually had to learn that the hard way several times, because we didn't look at the school calendar when we were planning events. So I think for any church that's looking to engage children and youth, school calendar is a big one to know when their breaks are, when they've got big games. I try to keep whatever the current sports season is. I try to keep their schedule around so that I can know, oh, nobody's going to come to that. They're all going to the basketball game, or, whatever big events are happening in the community, just to be aware of those. So you're not trying to compete. But we actually did a survey one year with our teen group, where we just tried to get as much information from them as possible, which is another way to encourage them to be a part of the process. And we asked them a lot of questions, from varying from what snacks do they like to have in the kitchen, all the way to when is the best meeting time. And we had several opportunities that they could check which one, and just looked at which one was the most likely for all of them to be there. And that was also a way to find out, like, what are some topics of discussion that you'd like to talk about. So think of like surveys. They love filling out, especially if it feels like a fun quiz that they might take on BuzzFeed, like, oh, hey, take our BuzzFeed church quiz to find out what teens want. That would be a good way to get that information when they can gather. But also, don't be afraid to include parents in your planning process too, and say, hey, would you be a part of our parent advisory team, that we're trying to get this going and we need your insight, because they're really in the loop with kids' schedules and community schedules for what's going on.
Thank you.
And I think it can feel like some competition sometimes too. I remember when I first started in ministry, I was appalled at the amount of activities that were on Sunday. And I was like, that is Jesus's day, like, step off, But I've gotten a little better, calmed down a little bit as far as identifying those spaces and times as places for the church to be engaged with the community, with organizations, in partnership, recognizing the collision of calendars is a place where the Holy Spirit can show up. So I'm trying to learn to be more gracious, and recognize that the cultural expectation of things shutting down on Sunday and everybody showing up at church for the full day, or Wednesday night even, is not the reality of today. And so I think that Matthew will probably share more about that as far as connecting with community partners. But it's good to build relationships. I think Kyla and Lee both spoke to relationships, and building relationships with leaders outside of the church. So building relationships with your local athletic groups, your dance groups, the coaches, all different sorts of people where you are present and showing up, and they realize that you aren't at odds with one another, that you're there to support them, and to also provide spiritual assistance when it shows up in that space.
I have a question. Has anyone engaged when you're meeting with your youth, for example, at the restaurant, in regards to current events, what has happened in other school systems, as far as is there a fear when you go to school? Do they feel that they are safe? And also, I think one thing that's very important is the environment with the parents, because the parents is the support group. And sometimes I've been involved with churches where parents would just drop the kids off, and then after a program is over, the pastor or the advisor or the director of the youth person has to sit there and wait until the parents come. So I think it's important, with all of the drama that has happened in our schools last year, and even the recent incident in Newport News, Virginia, that I think sometime we need to sit down and kind of get a feel of how our youth are feeling about current events in those situations.
I think that's huge. And I think that's really important to have those conversations. And I think it is our duty now, because it is so prevalent. Mental health in young people, the environment, it is beyond our capabilities as youth directors or normal teens. The folks are coming through our doors. I have found I am not 100% equipped to deal with every person through the doors, but there's people in my community that are. And so that is something I encourage any youth director at this time to do, is to get to know any resource out there in your community. And once you know their name, all of a sudden you get their cell phone. There's so many students I have turned to services that are capable, equipped to deal with family units, for food insecurity, any kind of mental health things, and they're struggling those places, but sometimes their biggest struggle, and this is where we come in, is that trust issue. When anyone asks for help, trusting that this is a safe place to go is huge. So a lot of times I feel like, for me, I have trust with family and youth. So when I'm able to ask and say, hey, you should check out this group, a lot of times I'll have better success than in a cold call or a counselor from a school. I'm a lot less threatening. So I think that's really good, the point you bring up. And yeah, that's my biggest encouragement, is get to know the services that are in your community.
There are a couple other questions that are in the chat, so I'll ask if our leaders will take a look at those. I saw one around the messy church and maybe address that in the chat. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and get our introduction going for Matthew, since he already jumped in there answering the question, which is great. Matthew Blackburn grew up in the Methodist Church as a son of a minister and was the director of a backpacking youth ministry for 6 years, Wilderness Trail. And since 2018, he's been the director of youth ministries at First United Methodist Church, Waynesville. There, they've found great success through their youth outreach programs and connecting to other nonprofits in their community. They have weekly Bible studies at the middle and high schools. They have a free middle school after school program, and they're in covenant with the neighboring Episcopal Church, where they do Wednesday and Sunday evening programs. Their free middle school after school program was an answer to the need in the community, and from this, the program has grown into being a conduit for learning more needs in the community and helping the church take action to fill needs. From community meals, showers, clothing closet, food pantry, food giveaways, collaborations with other nonprofits, and expanding our youth outreach to high school. Matthew has an amazing wife and 4 children who, as a team, they get the job done. So with that, we'll pass things over to Matthew.
Thank y'all. Yeah, and real fast, because I do think we're all in this room because of the ways we're impacted, and it's important. You can see in the ways we work. Yeah, she's mentioned I was involved, even when I was a young kid, in this Wilderness Trail backpacking ministry. Got kids out of the comfort zone, connecting with adults. Before the sticky faith was a term, it was doing this work in my life. The mentors, it's not so much the pastors, but the people who were there and volunteering as youth leaders were the folks that I continue to lean on in my life. And so that's been so influential for me. So out of my comfort zone, adults, it's been a priority for me. And then also too, my life has been changed by seeing the need in the community and finding out ways. And so that was something that was a huge part of my life. And then right before I got this position, I went to England, did the Wesley tour. And on that tour, I walked into the new room, John Wesley's start of the ministry in Bristol, England, and found out that was open 6 days a week. Every day except for Sunday, which I thought, that's really interesting. How much can we do in those 6 days a week? How much can I let that be a part of our ministry? I inherited a church that already had a lot of great places for youth to be a part of. So a lot of it was, I got gifted with that. In 2016, a community came together, and we're walking proximity of our middle school in town. And the middle schools had no place to go. There was no after school at all for middle school students in our community. They were causing havoc at the local library and stores. And so we opened our doors, and that was awesome. 5 days a week, a free program. Kids are coming in through our doors. Also, too, we're able to kind of get into the school systems, and we found it fairly easy. We'll do a breakfast at the middle school and high school once a week and be able to connect with kids that way. And so it's awesome. Right now, before Sunday evening, I've already connected with 150 kids. Pre-COVID, it had been like 200 plus before Sunday evening. That feels really good. It's icing on the cake, some of the Sunday evening stuff at that point. And so that was awesome for me. One of the things I got involved heavily is I had all these connections and all these activities going on. So you started thinking about where I can plug in youth, and all of a sudden, some of these pantries right down the road, it's like, hey, can you need some help? I got tired of those phone calls. I know you guys all get of moving furniture. So I want to keep my youth busy enough. So I want to have to say that. It's like, no, they're too busy for it. So, it became a regular thing to come to the food pantry was one of them, Hayward Christian Ministry right down the road. And all of a sudden, as I built those relationships, it became something so apparent that there wasn't any services on the weekends or after 5 in our community. And so that was something a lot of people in our church weren't aware of. That wasn't necessarily the demographic of our church and understand those kind of needs. Something we got brought forward. All of a sudden, we have a pantry now open on Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings, being a place for people to get food on those off hours, being a community. Early on, there was a soup kitchen in town that I would take seniors every week to just sit down and have a meal and be in fellowship every week. Senior pastor got real excited, came part of his sermon. And we have a free pancake day now because of it. We found out through those conversations, there was no showers on the weekends to be offered. We have showers here. There was no breakfast being served in our community. You find out these needs by these relationships. So all of a sudden, these connections was a conduit of information for our church to understand the real needs of the community. The other beautiful thing is it's a duality thing where all of a sudden we were connecting kids to some services. There were some kids who didn't know there was some things for food insecurity. And so that was a beautiful thing. A lot of times we're taking kids and they're helping prepare food, and they were really gracious and always let them take home a lot of food with them and able to connect and send information home to their parents. All of a sudden you're making those connections. And also too, for us, we have a beautiful facility that's not used so much during the week. And so some of those became office spaces for organizations who work with youth. So, we have 2 organizations that work with at-risk youth right here. And it's so easy for me to walk down the hall and say, I have this youth. All of a sudden, we've got a system where we're touching base and I'm able to fill out referrals for these youth. And that's an unbelievable, I feel so grateful for having that opportunity to be able to do that. And on top of that, this is like one year I did a chart of like from our after school. I don't know if y'all can see all the connections. Anyway, you can just see we're in the center. We made all these connections to the other organizations. And the fun part was it wasn't even just connections to our church with them. It was connecting other organizations with other things. The thing I found is nonprofits have no time. If you think a church has no time to get things done, walk into the door of a nonprofit. A lot of y'all probably worked in both doors, and it is so tough. And so I found that driving and meeting people in person who work these nonprofits during the times of working and just walking in and say, what can I do for you? I got some people here. Can I come here? And all of a sudden it became a start for us to make these relationships that we really want and have a real impact in the community, what we really feel like we're called to do. But anyway, that's the gist of where I'm at with things. We're hoping to, all of a sudden you just start getting into things, we just start seeing more of the need. I mean, we don't have the resources, but we're working on it to do some high school work because we've found it's such a need. I have students who go to high school now and say, I miss middle school. No one should say that. High school is awesome. But they're saying that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact they don't have anything to do after school. They don't have that. We have parents saying, my kids, can you just do something with them in after school? And so we're real excited, these relationships. We've gotten up with a local high school, it's an alternative learning school, who help kids who might not be able to graduate in the traditional sense, along with like the early college. And we're going on our community college campus starting next month of working in a greenhouse and building that up and building up some of that. So I just, it's over my head. I know you guys are all in it. You get excited about stuff and it just leads to more and more stuff, but it's a beautiful thing. But anyway, I encourage anybody to be able to get their youth involved with the community because it really opens the door not only to the youth, but to the church as a whole is what I found.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. Does anybody have some questions? for Matthew. I'd love to hear what some of your first steps were with connecting with community partners, because that can seem really intimidating.
Yeah, I drove around. I drove and knocked on the door and checked in. If there was somebody I knew the church was connected, I would try to talk with them. There's one place in particular, man, I used to drive. I could never catch anybody. I mean, I would do multiple trips, but that was the biggest thing is doing that. And then it's been fun too recently. It's been helpful for us to kind of even share staffing. I have one person who I work with every day who she works with another church that we have a covenant with. We have a covenant with our Episcopal church next door to us with our youth programming, and also to another after school program that does mainly elementary students and work with immigrant families and things of that nature. And so she works part-time there. So it's a great resource for us to kind of even share people. And I know our community is hard for us to be able to provide enough money, churches and nonprofits, for a full-time position for quality people. So sometimes we can join together, and that's where it comes to those relationships. And the relationships start with I think us going out. That's how I found out. I just went out and just knocked on doors and made sure, and I would volunteer. I would say, here's my number. When you get in a pinch, call me, and kind of fill in the gaps too for them.
Yeah, I agree with Matthew. It is hard. Like, it's awkward at first. You put yourself out there, and you don't always know how these community relationships are going to form, or what will come out as a result of them. But I did a lot of when I was the children's director at the church, I went around and asked for a meeting with each of the principals, and really just said, I'm here to listen. I have some questions. I want to know what you think the biggest needs are for children and families in this community. And through that, I was actually able to find further partnerships, because one of the big needs is food insecurity. So we had a partnership then formed with the Food Closet, with the backpack program, how our church could assist that. And we had somebody from the North Carolina Extension Office come in and do some kids nutrition fun days, just open to the community, but hosted at the church, where we could provide a full day. Part of it was the nutrition activity, and part of it was just fun and games and getting to know people in the church. So it felt like a day of camp, but based around nutrition. Trying to think of some of the other ones that have come out of that. A lot of it is just putting yourself out there. We looked for organizations that were already working with kids and teens in our community. So we have Western Youth Network that has a big presence here with mentoring, but they're not actually in our county. So we brought them to the church to do some discussion circles around things like self-care, stress, suicide prevention, with our teens, where we hosted at the church, provided snacks, a comfortable environment. They could come play pool. It was right after school. And then they had these discussion groups. So just looking for who's already working with children and teens and saying, how can we offer support as a church? We want to come wrap around you and make these even more successful.
Thanks, y'all. As we're moving in toward the end of our time together, we have just about 15 minutes. Before I start talking, I want to share with you this link. They would love feedback from the session today. And I think I have a QR code that I can share with you as well. So if you want to try scanning that QR code, or you can use the feedback link that's in the chat. I'll hold that up there for just another minute. All right, so my name is Nicole, and I started off in ministry as a director of Christian education in my 20s. I had no background or experience in that kind of work, and the church had never had that position before. So we learned together, and it was fun. And I did things then that, looking back, I was think, what was I doing? I remember we went down and did Hurricane Katrina relief, and I was like, I can't believe that parents would let their kid go off with some 20-something-year-old across multiple states and let them go up on top of a roof, So we do like a lot of crazy stuff in children and youth ministry. But I think as you're hearing today, like, the heart is what's most important. So my context is a little bit different from the other presenters. I've always served in smaller rural churches. That's how God's kind of funneled my call, is through the rural church. I'm a rural fellow through Duke Divinity School. When I went and I got a master's of divinity and became a pastor, that was something that was a focus of mine, was rural ministry. Somebody asked about the slides on screen and the materials. I think we can definitely send those slides out. Is that right, Kyla, Lee? Are you comfortable with that? So if you would like to receive slides, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So feel free to email me if you'd like any of the slides from today. So as we're closing our time together, I want to touch on two things. First is, does your church need to have a children and youth ministry? Some of you may be coming from a place where you already have a thriving ministry and you just want to get some tips to expand it even more, which I think we got a lot of good content today to be able to do that. Some of you may be in context similar to some of the places where I've served, where there's nothing and there's not a structure in place and there aren't any children there. I have a story of two different churches with two different approaches. I remember one lady at a church that I had served years before I had arrived. She had gone into the nursery and completely renovated the nursery. And people were asking her, what are you doing? There are no babies in this church. Why are you wasting your time? Why are you wasting your money? And she said, I have prayed about it, and the Lord has told me he will bring children to this church. And with that word from the Lord, she committed herself to creating space for that ministry to happen, space for when the children came, there would be a nursery ready for them. And sure enough, we had a bumper crop at some point in the life of the church, and there were just children coming in. And any of you who have been in ministry for a while, you know that children beget children. The youth beget youth. If you have, the more you have a critical mass, then it helps to attract more youth and more children, particularly if they have ways to connect with one another. So that's one story. I have another church who also said that they wanted to have children and youth. And we also shared that prayer. And I remember digging deeper and asking, what is it about children and youth? Why do you want children and youth? Well, we need, you may have heard this before, we just need more young families in our church. We're getting old. We're getting tired. We need somebody else, essentially, to pay the bills and do the work. This is a very different mentality. And if this is the spirit of where you are, I would humbly suggest more time in prayer. Because for me, having ministry with children and youth is not about finding someone else to do the work. Nevertheless, God answered the prayer of this church and sent children and youth. The church had to do nothing. A lady appeared at my doorstep who was not a member of the churches I was serving, and she said, I had felt called by God to start a youth ministry. She said, would you mind if we started meeting at your church? Because we feel like this community lacks everything. There weren't a lot of resources. There was no place for children to hang out. She said, I'll take care of everything. And she did. She brought at least 12 to 20 youth and children every week to the church. After the church went through the trustees, got the approval, y'all know how that goes. And so she started this really thriving group where the kids got to experience that. And I invited the church. I said, this is something amazing happening. The children and youth you've been praying for, they're here. Please come, please come. And we only had one person from the church who would ever show up. And I was a little discouraged, but I was like, I understand, it can be intimidating. Kids are loud and kids are messy. But I remember what really broke my heart one Sunday was I was walking into church and I was about to get in the pulpit and preach, and someone pulled me to the side and they said, I don't know what we're going to do about this children and youth program. She said, I had a phone call the other day from somebody. I'm not going to say who. That's our favorite kind of feedback, right, y'all? Anonymous tips right before you worship on Sunday morning. She said, I'm not going to say who it was, but they said they saw those children running in the cemetery. Somebody needs to do something. It wasn't long after that, that in spite of this group making thank you cards to the church, making sure they cleaned up every Sunday, that things just fizzled out. They realized that the church was not a hospitable space. They realized they weren't wanted there. They realized that there wasn't room or space. So before we engage in children and youth ministry, I think it's critical to really evaluate the spirit of our churches. Do we want to invest in the youth and children because we care that they know Jesus Christ is their Savior, that they are become disciples of a living God, that they are part of a community, a body of Christ, that they are finding ways to be empowered, to be leaders in the church? Or do we just want them to maybe show up in church as long as they're quiet and don't make a mess and don't require us to have to do anything? I think that's really important to discern within your congregation. You can have a very healthy, thriving church of retirees. That works. Especially in places, if you're a retirement community, like in Florida, they got a rotating doors of retirees. Like it's fine, it's good, it's healthy. But if you feel called to youth and children's ministry, find your allies, find the other people who care and are passionate about it, and then ask for the intentional prayer of your churches. So again, I'm speaking from a place of fewer resources, fewer volunteers, less of a budget, but a desire to connect. One of the best ways that we've found to connect is to reach out to our community through partnerships with our schools. I only have a couple minutes, so I'm happy to share more about this. If anybody wants to chat offline, if you want to send me an email, or I'm happy to connect and we can have a phone conversation. But church school partnerships are really important. And for me, that meant just showing up at the church, at the school, and saying, hey, I would love to meet with you, the administrative staff. I'd love to talk with you all and see what your needs are. And I'm the pastor from up the street. This church and this school, we're less than a mile from each other. And I'm like, y'all need to know each other. You are too close. You are literal neighbors. And so we started having conversations. We started building relationships. And I asked the principal, what do you need? Because too often as a church, we assume what other organizations need. And we drop off tons of stuff that doesn't require any kind of engagement or commitment, and just often leaves school in a pickle where they're like, oh, great, we've got 5,000 pencils, thank you. Or we've got a bunch of old clothes that none of our children would ever want to wear, thanks so much, and they're kind and they're gracious, but it's not helpful. So just sitting down and having a conversation, identifying the needs, and then saying, okay, we want to show up however we can. So with church school partnerships, in my experience, that has looked like a lot of things. But we started a Reading Buddies program where we were going into the schools and reading with children that were identified through their Title I teacher and their own teachers as kids who were high risk, but maybe not necessarily getting Title I help, that they were the kids that would really fall through the cracks. We did things where we would just show up and offer things like speakers and sound systems for some of their events, tables for when they have big family meals, when they're inviting all the families to come in for a cookout or a spaghetti dinner or whatever. Then we started doing things for the staff. we started creating staff appreciation things every month for the staff, and we do different things different months. You know, by the time December, January rolled around, we were throwing Clorox wipes and tissues and all that stuff because that's what they needed. We heard from one teacher that if a paper was sent home and that paper was on, if that paper was a certain kind of paper, you know, it's really important because typically they just used whatever they had around. They didn't have enough paper. And y'all, I was serving in a place called Paper Town. It was in Canton, North Carolina. Like, we made paper. And I thought, surely we can have paper for our teachers. So we had a big paper pounding Paper Town party at the school for the teachers. We came in, we made breakfast, we got tons of school supplies, and let the teachers shop, you know, essentially laid everything out and got 2 cases of paper for every teacher so that they would have that accessible. But just little things like that. And then those little appreciation gifts over the course of a year or two, the relationships continued building. I was showing up at the school at least 3 times a week, whether it was through reading buddies or whatever the case might be. Just showing up and being present and consistently present, learning the staff's names. And then we started doing something where they would come to the church. We created a staff appreciation dinner right around, it was on Maundy Thursday, because we wanted to express our appreciation to those who served in our community. And so we had a big banquet and we had door prizes and we fed them. And then there was an optional communion service at the end in a different space. So fellowship hall, party, eat. But if you wanted to stay and have a communion service on Maundy Thursday, there was an invitation to do so, but no pressure. And so relationships were built around that. And we had an after school program just once a week. I think it started out with, maybe even started as once a month and then went into once a week. But one story I remember is this little boy coming into the sanctuary for the first time for this program. And he walked into the sanctuary and he saw y'all know those big old chairs where the preachers sit sometimes. He walked in and his mouth got like just dropped and his eyes got wide and he goes, "Is that where God sits?" And this little boy had never been in a church before. So creating the trust by going to these third spaces, whether it's going to the libraries and participating in the story times or going to the schools or going to the athletic fields, showing up consistently and building relationships with trusted adults creates space for them to trust you in return and for them to feel comfortable for children that they know to come into that space. So that's been a really important part. I know we're out of time, so I'm going to stop chatting, but I'd love to talk with you all more about what's happening in your context. Every context is different. Every person experience is going to be really different too, but we want to provide just a brief overview of the many ways that you can engage in youth and children's ministry. Do we have any final questions or parting thoughts? All right. Well, if not, I would love for a volunteer who would like to close us out in prayer today.
Let us pray. Most awesome and most wise God, we come to you today thanking you for this opportunity that you have presented before us. God, we know that the fields are white for harvest. God, and equal us to the task that is before us so that we can go out and be those laborers that bring in children, youth, and their families. God, we ask you to bless our work so that in all things you get the glory, the honor, and the praise. These things we ask you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. It was great to be with y'all today. God bless you.
All right.
Thank you. And thank you. It's awesome.
Bye-bye.
Angela, thanks so much for staying on and manning the tech today.
I didn't have to do anything, but I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed your stories. That was a good note to end on. Good reminders.
Yes.